called the patriarchal succession, coming down to the time when Bodhidharma went from India to China and then started the Chan succession down to the sixth patriarch, Hui Neng. Hui Neng.
Is this the reason some people refuse to take refuge in the Buddha and the Sangha and they just take refuge in the Dharma? It's like Buddha said, you should just take refuge.
I've never heard of, because even in the canonical text, we have people taking refuge, during the Buddha's lifetime, people are always taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and then that became like a well-established tradition.
That was even during the Buddha's time?
Yeah. If you look in sutta after sutta, you see that at the end of when the Buddha finishes giving a discourse, people will say, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Of course, maybe that became codified after the Buddha passed away. This we don't know, but it's certainly part of the early teaching. Okay, so now this is the question that Vasakkara asked to Ananda. And Ananda says that there is no single monk that we take refuge in, who's been appointed by the Buddha, that we take refuge in and we look to him as our recourse. So then Vasakkara, he's maybe perplexed by this. Okay, maybe the Buddha didn't take that precaution, so the Buddha passed away without appointing a successor. But maybe the Sangha got together and appointed a successor. And so he says, is there, Master Ananda, any single monk who has been chosen by the Sangha and appointed by a number of senior bhikkhus? Thus, he will be our refuge now that the Buddha has passed away. And then Ananda says, no, it's not even the case that the Sangha has gotten together and appointed one single monk to become the leader of the Sangha, and that we all take refuge in him and look to him as we take recourse in him. So then Vasakkara says, well, in that case, Master Ananda, you don't have any refuge, so how are you able to live together harmoniously? So then Ananda says that even though there is no personal successor to the Buddha, still we are not without a refuge, Brahman. We have a refuge. Our refuge is the Dhamma. Maybe this is why some people follow that practice. Okay, then in a rather long and roundabout way, and I think this was just added by the compilers of the text in order to include some repetition. So in a rather roundabout way, Vasakkara comes to the end of the first paragraph in section 10. He says, how should the meaning of these statements be understood? And then Ananda explains to him. He says, Brahman, the Blessed One who knows and sees, the Arahat, the Sammasambuddha, has prescribed the course of training for the monks. And the word or expression that's translated here as course of training actually has a somewhat narrower meaning. The word is sikkhapada. Patience. Yeah, the word Sikkhapada, as it's come to be understood, well, first, the way it's explained, or the way it's constructed, the word Sikha means training. And so in the broad sense, in early Buddhism, we have what's called the threefold training. So we have the training in virtue or moral conduct, ethical conduct. And then sometimes they speak about the monastic rules of discipline as adi, sila, sika, the training in the extensive conduct, extensive virtuous conduct, virtuous conduct, or the higher conduct. Then we have the adhicitta sika, the training in the developed mind, the higher mind, which is the training for the practice of samadhi, of deep concentration. And then we have the adhipanya sika, that is the training in the deeper or higher wisdom. That's the wisdom of insight, the wisdom of realization. But the word pada, it's a very general word. Could be almost translated as factor. So we have factor of training. And so the word Sikkhapada comes to be used as a designation for a precept. So, for example, in the lay precepts, we call them the Panchasila, but when you take them, you say, for example, Panati Pata Vairamani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. So each of the 5 precepts is called Sikkhapadang. That is a factor of training. So it's a factor of the moral training. And so the word Sikkhapada in relation to the monastic code of discipline is also used for each of the training factors that the monks undertake. So each of the rules of the Patimokkha is called a Sikkhapada, a factor of training. So loosely we call it a precept, but the technical term used is Sikkhapada.
That's not the same pada as like Dhammapada.
It's the same pada. Yeah. So the word pada, as I said, has very broad meaning. So it could mean, one of the meanings is word. So Dhammapada could be words of Dhamma. And pada can also refer to a verse. So Dhammapada could be verses of Dhamma. But pada also means a step. So Dhammapada could be taken to mean steps of Dhamma.
Is it one of the interpretations path also, PhD?
One of the words which is translated as path is actually constructed from pada, and that is the word patipada. And patipada, you see, pada originally, one of the senses is a step, and patipada would be a succession of steps, a repetition of steps. So the repetition of steps is a path. Okay, so Ananda says, to the Brahman, he says, the Blessed One has prescribed the course of training for bhikkhus. So I think the intent here is that he's laid down the rules of training. So this is going to be the basis for their concord, that they have a similar, that they have the same body of precepts to observe. And he has laid down the Patimokkha. The Patimokkha is simply the collection of these training rules. And then Ananda explains that on the Uposatha day, the Uposatha day occurs twice in the month, or twice in the month, on the full moon day and on the dark moon day. So on this day, this was an ancient tradition in India, to observe these days as kind of days of religious observance. And so the Buddha conformed to that practice. And so what became the standard Uposatha observance for the monastic community is for all the monks or nuns separately living in a particular location to gather and then to recite the code of discipline together. Okay, so Ananda says, on the Uposatha day, as many of us live in dependence upon a single village district, meet together in unison, and when we meet, we ask one of our group who knows the Patimokkha to recite it. So you see, in this early period, it seems that the Sangha would be, or the monks in the order could be spread out in a rather wide area around a certain town or village, and yet they would determine a particular boundary for that village they would determine a particular boundary as defining the extent in which they're all can be considered to be dwelling somewhat in the same region or same area. And so they would determine a fixed place where they should all meet. Maybe they would have like a hall in the town or village, or some place which is in convenient location for everybody to come together. And so then on the full moon day and the dark moon day, all of the monks would come together and live in order to hold the ceremony. The practice nowadays is to have the boundary simply around the monastery itself so that all of the monks can come together. And even in the larger monasteries, what's done in order to avoid, this is a rather technical point, to avoid the problem of having monks who are living in the monastery, but for somehow they're overlooked, and so they miss out on the observance. They'll formally define the area for the observance, just a small area, maybe the area of maybe about 30 square feet around in this room. So then all of the monks who are going to perform the ceremony will come within that area. And so there's no possibility that somebody will be left out by mistake if there's some visitor comes to the monastery. Okay, so now, but this seems to have been the practice described here is the practice from the early period. So when we all come together, then one of the monks will recite the code of discipline, the Patimokkha, and then if a monk, while the Patimokkha is being recited, if a monk remembers any offense or transgression he's committed, then he will, what's said here is we make him act in accordance with the Dhamma, in accordance with the instructions. Actually, but what is the practice that's usually done is that when the monks come together, if a monk remembers any transgression that he's committed, he will make a confession of that transgression before the recitation takes place, just usually to one other monk. For most of the offenses, just to confess it to one other monk is enough to be cleared. In the case of the heavier transgressions, the procedure is different. In the case of the heaviest, then the monk has to leave the order. It's a violation of the fundamental rule, so he has to be expelled. If, when the Patimokkha is being recited, he remembers a transgression that he has not yet confessed, then after the transgression, he can take usually just one other monk aside and confess to him. But he won't interrupt the recitation in order to get up and make a public confession. Okay, so then Ananda says that it is not the worthy ones that make us act, it is the Dhamma that makes us act. This is a little obscure, but I think it might be better translated, it is not the worthy ones, that is, it is not the other monks that deal with us, in other words, that prescribe, you should do this, you should not do that, but rather it is the Dhamma that deals with us. That is, it's from the Dhamma that we learn what we should avoid, what we should do. Okay, maybe at this point I'll ask whether there are any questions on any of the material covered so far. Maybe our procedure here is that when one has a question, one takes the microphone. This ensures that the question will be recorded and everybody can hear it.
I didn't realize that it's a normal occurrence for monks or even lay people to offer confessions.
Oh, this is the regular monastic practice. A procedure is not laid down for lay people, but what I suggest to lay people, if they transgress one of the precepts that they've undertaken, and it's something that makes them feel, strong remorse, they can confess it either to a senior friend or to a monk. And this way will help to alleviate, the feeling of remorse in the mind, that they know that they've opened up about it and are not concealing it. Okay, Richard in the back.
This I know is kind of curious question.
Okay.
But I was very struck in this by one thing. That is, this refers both back to 22, which is the simile of the snake, right? And in the background story for this, you have Devadatta appearing wrapped in snakes, right?
Oh,
Yeah?
no. 22, Sutta 22 is the discourse on the simile of the snake.
Yeah.
Devadatta doesn't appear in that at all.
Right. No, I'm saying in the background story that you told about this one,
Yeah.
Devadatta appears in order to persuade Ajatasattu,
Yeah.
right? But he appears in Ajatasattu's, mansion or whatever,
Yeah.
his castle,
Yeah.
wrapped in snakes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The other thing is, this also refers back to the lion's roar.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of material in this refers to the lion's roar, right?
In the back, the way I explained the background, yeah.
Yeah. Now, what I'm trying to understand is, you know the figure of Ion? Ion was, under the Roman Empire, there was a god, Ion, who is a person wrapped in a snake with a lion's head. And the associations are the same. And so what I was wondering is, apparently it was an Oriental god that made its way into the Roman Empire, probably via Syria.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the figure that Jung takes to be the symbol of the self. And I was trying to figure, one, is there any connection to Buddhism? I mean, it was a 40-day trip from Kanyakumari to the Euphrates. And two, that is this it seems to be a polar reaction, like the snake and the lion's head. The lion's head becomes a Buddhist thing because of the lion's roar, I assume. But then the snake seems to be is associated with much more with Hinduism and with things rather hostile to Buddhism. And that is. Many non-Hindus in India complain about being in a country of snakes and living amongst people who believe in the naga, in the snake, right? And so I was wondering if that figure is a composite of two opposites, that is of the the lion was a Buddhist part, and if the snake is something that comes like through Devadatta that's hostile to Buddhism.
Yeah, this I don't know, but I don't think the snake has an entirely hostile, or that the snake is viewed as an entirely hostile being in Buddhism.
Okay.
Because in the account of the events after the Buddha's enlightenment, one of these days, was it? Yeah, it said that there was a rain, it was drizzling, and then a particular snake came and spread its hood over the Buddha in order to keep him dry so that he wouldn't get, wet, moistened by the rain.
Well, you see, that's
But
also...
anyway, I think we should try to keep questions more directly on the subject matter. Bringing together the when I was referring to, the story of Devadatta, then I mentioned the snakes. And when I was speaking about the Buddha's distinctive qualities, I brought in the sutta on the lion's roar. But they're not brought, the lion and the snake are not brought together to my mind, to my recollection, in a single sutta. Yeah, so. And it's an area that I don't know, Roman mythology and where its sources from. I don't know.
Explain one more time. Pati Mokkha.
Yeah. The word is somewhat a matter of, the origins are exactly not known. My supposition, you see the word mokkha, there's a word mokkha which means freedom. And so sometimes patimokkha is understood to be a code of discipline that leads to freedom or liberation. And then sometimes pati is taken to be individual. So I know the Tibetans take patimokkha to be the path of individual liberation. And so since it comes from early Buddhism, they say that like the patimokkha is distinctive of the Hinayana or Shravakayana, the path of individual liberation. How do the Chinese render? I think they just transliterate the sounds, potimo, something like that. Potimocha. But I found that there's a verb that occurs in Pali, pati munchati, which means to bind down. And to me that makes better sense, that the patimokkha is the code of rules that binds one down, in the sense of binds one's conduct to a certain pattern. That's my supposition. Any further questions? Because I want to finish the sutta today, so let us then continue. Okay, so now number 11. Now the Brahmin Vasikara says, "Is there, Master Ananda, any single monk whom you now honor, respect, revere, and venerate, and on whom you live in dependence, honoring and respecting him?" Now that is the case. And as we'll see, Ananda affirms that there are at least one, but in fact there are many. Because there were supposed to be many elder monks who had been, practicing and training under the Buddha for, at least 40 years. And so Ananda answers positively. He says that, though the text says there is a single bhikkhu, but actually the implication of this is that there is at least one monk, but actually there are many more, that there are at least many more that they honor, respect, revere, and venerate. And so now Vasikara thinks that he's caught Ananda in a contradiction here, that Ananda said that there's nobody who's been appointed a refuge, but you say that still you have monks that you honor, respect, and venerate. So then he says, how should the meaning of these statements be regarded? How do we reconcile them? And so then Ananda says that there are these 10 qualities that inspire confidence. Here the Pali word is pasada. The word pasada has a range of meanings. It's closely connected with the word saddha, which is often translated as faith, but whereas saddha emphasizes, on the one hand, more the aspect of believing, pasada maybe has a more emotional ambience. It's the quality of, maybe, I would like to explain it by the word trust. It's the quality that makes the mind serene through trust. And so pasada is, for example, if one looks at an inspiring Buddha picture, image of the Buddha or statue of the Buddha, you might have saddha, that's faith, all along. But when you look at, say, a very beautiful, inspiring Buddha image, then your mind becomes sort of serene, a bit joyful, and a feeling of kind of trust or even self-dedication, dedicating oneself to the Buddha, sort of manifests in the mind. And that would be the quality of pasada, of this confidence or trust. And so Ananda says that there are these 10 qualities inspiring confidence that have been declared by the Buddha. And so when these qualities are found in anyone among us, then we honor, respect, revere, and venerate him, and live in dependence on him, honoring and respecting him. So what are the 10 qualities? And now they unfold in a kind of graded sequence. So we have the monk is virtuous in his behavior, that he lives observing the rules of the patimokkha, and he undertakes the training precepts. Then he's learned, one who's learned much, and who's mastered the teachings, the teachings which have been transmitted through the scriptures. Then third is he's easily content with the simple material requisites of robes, alms food, a dwelling place, and medicinal supports. Then he is one, so these first 3 pertain to the aspect of sila, of morality. Then comes number 4, he obtains at will, without trouble or difficulty, the 4 jhanas, the 4 meditative absorptions that constitute the higher mind and provide a pleasant dwelling here and now. So this is the explicit aspect of samadhi, concentration. Then come 5 developments out of samadhi. These are the superpowers or super knowledges. That is, being able to wield the different kinds of supernormal power, to multiply the body, to vanish and appear, to travel through the air sitting cross-legged, to dive in and out of the earth, to walk on water, and so forth. Then comes the divine ear element. That's the ability to hear distant sounds and voices in other realms of existence. 7 is the ability to know the minds of other beings, of other people, to know exactly their state of mind. 8 is the recollection of past lives, to be able to recollect one's past lives. The divine eye, by which one could see beings passing away and taking rebirth. So these 5, from number 5, I think, up to number 9, are developments out of samadhi. So somebody who has mastered the jhanas, and beyond the jhanas, the formless meditations, and then makes the effort in this direction, can develop these superpowers or super knowledges.
These are all qualities of an arahant, right? Only an arahant would have any of these.
That's a good question, but let me just finish them, and then you raise the question. Okay, then the 10th one is, this is the super, we call the world transcending or super mundane realization. That is, by realizing for himself with direct knowledge, he here and now enters and abides in the deliverance of mind, deliverance by wisdom that are taintless with the destruction of the taints. That is the destruction of all the defilements, which means, in effect, the attainment of arhatship. And so then Ananda sums up and says, when a monk possesses these 10 qualities, then we honor, respect, revere, and venerate him. And I should add a bit as a footnote, my suspicion or my personal belief or attitude is that for a monk to be respected, revered, and venerated, he shouldn't have to possess all of those qualities. It would seem that the superpowers maybe can be dispensed with, because there are many monks who didn't, the great majority didn't attain the superpowers. But certainly we take 1, 2, 3, 4, and the last one, 10, would be qualities that would make a monk superbly worthy of respect. And even it's said that to achieve arhatship, at least from the perspective of the developed tradition, maybe the jhanas are not absolutely necessary. And so even if a monk, through the practice of dry insight, achieves arhatship, certainly he would be worthy of respect and veneration. But it's possible that this statement was made here, this is just a conjecture, alluding to Mahakassapa, because Mahakassapa was praised by the Buddha for possessing, in fact, all of these qualities. That is, there are a number of suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 16, that's the chapter about Mahakassapa, where the Buddha praises Mahakassapa's mastery of the jhanas, the formless meditations, and the superpowers. And then after, when the Sangha met at the boar's cave in order to undertake the council, to perform the recitation of the text, then Mahakassapa was the one who pretty much emerged as the president of the assembly, or the leader of the assembly. So he became, because he was the eldest surviving pupil of the Buddha. The chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana, they had passed away before the Buddha passed away. And Anuruddha was another elder, but I would assume that he was junior to Mahakassapa. And also Anuruddha was somewhat of a retiring type, a little bit sort of introspective, whereas Mahakassapa, he liked to dwell in solitude and remote places, but he had a strong, authoritative personality. Okay, let's just finish up the sutta because it's getting to the end of our time. Okay, I'm just going to jump down a little bit to save time. That as the conversation unfolds, then the Brahman Vasikara says to Ananda, this is just the end of section 25, he says, Master Gautama, that's the Buddha, was a meditator and cultivated meditation, and he praised every type of meditation. And so now you think, certainly the Buddha should praise every type of meditation, but Ananda criticizes the statement. And he says that the Buddha didn't praise every type of meditation, nor did he condemn every type of meditation. But there were certain types of meditation that the Buddha didn't praise. And what are these? Someone abides with his mind obsessed by sensual lust. Then we'll just jump through them. By sensual lust, by ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse and doubt. And then with his mind obsessed by doubt, he meditates, premeditates, outmeditates, and mismeditates. Here we have a string of verbs in Pali, somewhat difficult to translate exactly into English. There's a bit of a wordplay going on here. So the verbs are jayati, which is actually the verb for meditate, then pujayati, basically the same meaning, a little more forceful, nijayati, this is what's translated here as out meditates, and upajayati, which suggests meditating off the right track. And so, in other words, Ananda is saying that if somebody's mind is overwhelmed by the 5 hindrances, and then he's meditating with his mind just driven by the 5 hindrances, then that's not the type of meditation that the Buddha praised. But then the type of meditation that the Buddha praised is, then comes the formula for the 4 jhanas. Okay, when Ananda says that, then the Brahman Vasikara accepts his statement, then excuses himself and says, we are busy, I have much to do, then he leaves. Then after he leaves, now at paragraph 29, okay. After Vasikara leaves, then the Brahman Gopaka asks or says to the Venerable Ananda, he says, Master, Ananda has not yet answered what we asked him. Then Ananda says, didn't we tell you? And then he repeats the statement at the beginning of the sutta, that there's no single monk who has all of the qualities of the Buddha, for the Buddha was the one who aroused the unarisen path, and so on. And so there's a little question, why, when Ananda had answered, why did Gopaka Moggallana say that he hadn't yet answered? The sutta doesn't give an answer itself, but the commentary gives some explanation. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it's a little bit interesting about the observation on human behavior. According to the commentary, Gopaka Moggallana was somewhat envious that Vasikara sort of interrupted the conversation and got to ask many questions, and Ananda answered all of the questions, and he only got to ask one question. And so he felt a little, well, a little or a lot, I don't know, but he felt somewhat upset by this. And so he thought, when I asked my question, Ananda answered me so briefly, and yet here this Vasakkara comes, and Ananda answers so many questions and explains them at length. So he feels, I have to get a fuller explanation from Ananda. And so though Ananda had answered, he says, you didn't answer my question. Please answer it now. And Ananda just repeats the answer. Okay, I'm sorry we didn't leave more time for questions. But we come back at the end after the lunch. We'll break for the lunch now. And so then please come back, and then if you have any questions, you bear them in mind, and then we can discuss them after the lunch period. Yeah, we'll come back so that you don't have to rush through lunch and have a little chance to chat. Let's say 12:15. Okay? Okay, now we end with the sharing of the merits. So you have the sheets with the verses. So now we're going to recite in Pali. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacha mehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacha mehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacha mehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Pavagupadaya avichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. Okay, we end with 3 half bows to the Buddha. Oh, I should mention that we have the class next week, and next week we'll take Sutta number 109. That's very interesting and very important sutta with many questions about the 5 aggregates. So this will give us a chance to go back and review the 5 aggregates and the nature of Sakkaya Ditthi, individuality view, whatever. That's my advertisement for next week's class.
How to